Welcome to the Citizen 7 podcast. My name is Chris Spangle. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. It is lunch with Greg and Don, and we are going to get to know a little bit more about Greg Enas and Don Palmer, who are the founders of Citizen 7. They're going to tell us their backgrounds, how they met, how we formed Citizen 7, so you get to know them a little bit better, and then hear about the development of the organization. So when you show up to one of the Citizen 7 events, all that's going on. Let's introduce Greg and Don in no preferential treatment. Don, thanks for being here. And Greg, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks, guys, for joining us today.
What is Lunch with Greg and Don? Every month, we're going to touch base with Don and Greg, and we're going to talk a little bit about Citizen 7, what's going on in the organization. Going to bring on folks who are they're going to highlight from the community that are doing great work, and also talk about the upcoming event. So that's what Lunch with Don and Greg is, and you can check us out every month. We're also going to set this up on YouTube. We'll also have a podcast feed, so you can take it with you. If you missed it, you can also watch the replays in heartbeat.chat. If you are not a member of the heartbeat.chat, that is the online community for Citizen 7. And be sure you can put it in the chat, and Laura will send you a link and you can sign up and get connected with other great guys. I'm Chris Spangle. I am a local podcaster who is also a member of Citizen 7. I go to church with Greg Enas down at Redeemer. That's how we got connected initially. I'm by day the digital director for the Bob and Tom Show. I produce a lot of podcasts. My side business is producing podcasts. And so I had the technical know-how and volunteered my time here to make this happen and help spread the word about Citizen 7. And that's, if you want to know more about me, then you can Google me and we can chat. But Greg, let's start with you. Let's start with your background. Tell us where you grew up. Give us the origin story of Greg Enas. How did you end up here at Citizen 7? Let's start as a kid. Where'd you grow up?
Thanks, Chris. And thanks, guys, for taking a few moments out. I'm wearing official Citizen 7 swag t-shirt today. I mention that only because when Chris talks about my origins, I was much less heavy than I am now. So I'm filling it out more than I usually am. But we made a bunch of these. I have a few extra. And if any of you ever want to wear a Citizen 7 t-shirt proudly, these are vintage swag. These were done years ago. And who knows, they might be worth a few $1,000 right now. But I offer them for free. Eli Lilly recruited me here to Indianapolis in 1982. My hometown is Berkeley, California. Grew up in the 60s, born in 56. I just turned 68 years old. I'm very thankful to be 68. I'm 68 and feeling great. And I grew up in the heyday of what you might know about the free love, the Black Panthers, the Black Power movement, the Vietnam War, Ronald Reagan shutting down my city. I couldn't even get back in my city when National Guardsmen were called in to quell the Vietnam War protests. And my grandmother and mother were held up in a city bus while a person was shot to death nearby during the Peak People's Park riot. So I come from a life of adventure growing up. Not adventure I really wish on people, but that sense of urban life has always compelled me. When Lily recruited me here in 82, I always had a heart for urban Indianapolis. In fact, in 83, I was one of the first buyers of an old home in the Old North Side at 12th and Central with another friend of mine. And we wanted to work with inner city kids at the Community Outreach Center at 23rd and Guilford. And we were already doing that. We thought this is a beautiful place to be hospitable, to let them work with us, to rehab our home. We'd pay them for that. We took them on bike trips around the state with Wandering Wheels out of Taylor University. We took them mountain climbing to 14,000-foot peaks in Colorado. We mentored them after school. Most were either tech high school or manual high school students. And out of that friendship and ethos, I started learning about the city and urban Indianapolis in particular. At that time, I met Don. I believe he was still single like me at the time. And
what year approximately, can I ask?
83 to 84, somewhere around there. And Don can tell you how he came through his job efforts back here at his hometown. But we were both single at the time. Don was hosting a Bible study at his house. And man, I said, this is great. Back where I come from, you get shot for holding Bible studies at your houses. And here's a guy holding a Bible study in his home. And I was really excited
Let,
to
let
be a
me
part of
let
it.
me let me pause there. So what you grew up in a hostile environment towards Jesus and Christianity?
Yeah, that's right. We walked to church as young boys, and we could feel the stares of all the neighbors
Hmm.
looking at us on Sunday mornings in our starch white shirts, going to an independent fundamental Baptist church 3 blocks away. We stood out like sore thumbs. But I will tell you, after Christmas was over every year and all the toys from all our friends would put away, we had 25 boys at my house every day because my mom loved them in the name of Jesus.
Hmm.
She hosted a child evangelism club. Those boys love our family, even though the culture around us was pretty wild. You may be familiar with a group called Tower of Power.
Hmm.
Steve Kupka. I knew his sister, Kathy Kupka, because Steve was one of the founders of this fusion group called Tower of Power. He lived right around the corner. And so it was a very artistic community. It was a multiracial community, Black, white, Hispanic all together. But the culture was such that nobody went to church. And some little boys with starch white shirts going to church was quite an anomaly.
So you knew the Lord early on.
Yeah.
Did you have a conversion moment or was it from childhood?
From childhood. My mom and dad loved Jesus. My grandparents loved Jesus. My great grandparents loved Jesus. And they were always, I won't go into their family histories, but they were always outsiders. So our family always had a sense of being in the world, but not of the world. My dad wouldn't let me take sex ed when I was in 5th grade. He pulled me out of class. My mom would take all the books that we had to read with all these cuss words in them, and she would cross out the cuss words in these public school textbooks before she allowed me to read them. We didn't have a television in our home till I was 13 years old. It was that kind of family, but there was love for everybody, and the whole neighborhood congregated at our home.
So you come to Indianapolis to work for Lily and you meet Don and you're single and you're milling around. You join a Bible study. Pick up the story from there.
Don and I didn't connect fully until much later on when we became friends. We started covenanting together to meet together as brothers with some other brothers, and we're still doing that. Don and I have been connecting in this covenant group for over 2 decades now. But Don came to me one day and said, "Hey, Greg, I'm on the board of KIPP schools. How would you like to mentor with me at the middle school, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade down at 42nd and Millersville Road?" Alicia Johnson, who's the current school superintendent for IPS, was the principal at the time. And I said yes. And the reason I said yes is I'd seen all the do-gooderism going on and all these well-intended hearts pouring money into the hood and this and that, projects and suburban churches getting involved and pulling back out. And the reason I did it was not for those boys that we were given to mentor. It was because I grew to love Don. And that's the genesis of Citizen 7. We cannot change the world. We cannot stop world hunger and bring world peace. Because if you do that and that's your goal, you'll end up seeing kumbaya. And I've seen too much kumbaya going on. But what we can do is what Jesus commanded us to do is love the person next to you as yourself. And I grew to love Don. And it's out of that friendship. I went to mentor these boys because I knew I'd get to be with Don. And then the overflow of that love and friendship between us spilled out beautifully into those 15 boys who were the highest risk boys that they gave us. And it was a beautiful experience for a few years.
And we're going to be taking your questions at the end. We'll go around 30 minutes today. So please, we'll take a Q&A question. So if you have questions along the way. So when you, and Don, feel free to chime in here about this. What did that mentoring look like? How were you mentoring them? What was the setup like?
We go right into the school. If you know anything about KIPP schools, and Don knows a ton more than I do about KIPP, knowledge is power, basically. But their aspiration, they have pennants from all the Ivy League schools draping the schools. They want kids from the hood to go to college and good schools. And so they gave us these boys. We'd sit in a room together. Sometimes we'd bring food and treats. Sometimes we go visit their music room and see them bang on the drums all day, stuff like that. But most of the time, we just sit and we'd hear them out. What's your story? And we learned about dad being in prison. We learned about mom being on the streets. We learned about what they like What has excited them? What trip did they take, if any, over spring break? We just listened and learned and try to get beneath the reading, writing, and arithmetic into who they were as human beings made in the image of God. That's what we did by and large.
There was one guy named Kenny, and I think it was for sure the whole year, we would ask questions. What was your best this week? Hey, my mom gave me a video game, or I went to a movie or something. And this kid would hardly say anything. And you'd think, when is this kid going to say something? And I remember one of the kids, I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he says, I want to be a trash truck driver. I said, really? Okay. Why is that? He says, because they make $100,000 a year. You realize that there weren't any lawyers or doctors, or there weren't any people in his neighborhood. So that was what his aspiration was. And I said, somehow we got on the college, where would you want to go to school? He said, I'd like to go to Brown Mackie College. I really had that was just something that was on the Circle Center Mall, right? It was a sign. I thought, boy, we're in fertile ground here in terms of being able to influence. But back to Kenny, on our very last time that we mentored, and we would go in just at lunch. This didn't take more than an hour and a half a week, Greg. It wasn't
That's right.
long. So we can pat ourselves on the back, but it wasn't like we gave ourselves the school for a year or something. And we said, what was your best? And he's never answered the question, Kenny. And then he says, I got something to say. And everybody looked at him. Kenny has something to say. And he says, I met my grandfather for the first time. And his grandfather had just gotten out of prison. And it hit me how I filter life through my own experiences, and just never even thought about that. But for him to be vulnerable, for us to have earned his trust, that made the whole school year worthwhile.
Yeah, this is something that I hear. I hosted a nonprofit radio show, basically the public affairs programs for iHeart Indy, and then for the Indiana Association of School Broadcasters. Talking to nonprofits over and over, one thing that comes up is the importance of networks and the importance of mentorship, and just how cross-pollinating different life experiences really impacts especially folks who are in lower income situations who don't necessarily have those networks. So having mentored young men, I don't want to say long ago, but having mentored maybe a decade, 2 decades ago, what has the impact? Talk about the importance of networks and maybe some of your experiences and how that flourished for some of the kids.
First of all, I would say that, to be honest, Greg and I probably got more out of it than the kids. That our hearts were changed, our perspectives, our empathy levels. So I think from that standpoint, we have had occasional touches with these boys. But I think mentorship, when I've been successful with it, I don't know that like the people that I'd be mentoring would say, well, he's my mentor. No, we're doing life together and we're intentional about being in touch. Yeah, there's the group of guys.
Great. Greg's got
I keep this right on my other desk. These are the boys, one of the class of boys that we were with those few years.
One of them went to Providence, Cristo Del Rey. I know the other went to Heron. There was really an interesting variety of high schools that we went to.
So, Greg, we're talking a little bit about your story. I think over time, flesh out a little bit more. We're not trying to get the complete Greg Enas and Don Palmer biography here, but if you have questions about maybe their particular stories, you may know their stories better than I if you're out there listening. And please feel free to send in questions to chris@chrisspangle.com, and I'm happy to ask them here on Lunch with Greg and Don. Don, let's talk about your origins. Where did you start? Tell us a little bit about growing up and schooling and then the early parts of your career.
Yeah.
That were formational to you, I would say.
Sure. I was one of 4 children. Interestingly enough, my mother was born at 82nd and Westfield. I grew up at 79th and Westfield. And with the exception of about 4 or 5 years, my mother had the opportunity to live like 84 years within 3 blocks of where she was born, which is just remarkable. My dad was from Knox, Indiana, and really His mother died when he was 2. I think he was the youngest of 6 children. I was the only boy out of four kids. I went to North Central. I went to Nora School, which was from 79th and Westfield. You could either walk it or bicycle it. And the Jordan Y was right there. And then my grandparents lived in between the Jordan Y and our house. So there was always milk and cookies on the way home. So it made a good stop, and it was great for our relationship. I grew up at University Park Christian Church, which was right there, is the church common ground. That used to be the old University Park Church. And so it was a church that was vibrant way back when, and then just got older. And then Common Ground came in and has done amazing things there. But I went to North Central. I went to Purdue, went up there to wrestle, realized I was a very good wrestler, but not a great wrestler. And so I had to be honest with my abilities. Didn't wrestle after the first year, but got a business degree. At that time, I did get involved with Young Life. I did have the benefit. My church background or Christian background would be much different than Greg's. I don't ever remember talking to my parents about prayer. My parents were very devout about bringing us to church, and my grandfather was very involved in the church. And I remember when he would bow his head and pray, you could tell that he was truly praying. And my cousin and I, David Palmer, who's a Purposeful Design founder and CEO, we would just be laughing and writing each other's notes and cartoons. It just wasn't really resonating with us. But through the vehicle Young Life, got to know who the person of Jesus was, and followed that in a leadership volunteer position up at Purdue. I went to work for the Xerox Corporation in sales for a couple of years. Went to Cincinnati for a few years and learned what it was like to be on the outside. In Indianapolis, there probably isn't anywhere I could go on the north side that I wouldn't know somebody. Having gone to a large high school and a public university, and then being in the retail business. In Cincinnati, I didn't have anybody to even call for a cup of coffee. And so it was really great for me to experience that sense of loneliness, that sense of being the insider. And I think one of the things that drove me, and Greg and I, relative to Citizen 7, is that nobody needs to be excluded, and that we can be inclusive, and that you don't have to be part of the club or the clique or some conventional group in order to be accepted. So that was, I think, sometimes they say sometimes our pain points become our ministry or our heart points. And certainly that was the case for me.
So as we move into starting to talk about C7, let's talk about the covenantal friendship group that you're both in, and what that has meant and how that has helped. Greg, you touched on it, but let's hear your perspective, Don. When you formed the covenantal friendship group, and what has that group meant to you, and how has that impacted C7?
I love the quote from Charlie Tremendous Jones that says that we're the same person 5 years from now as we are today, with the exception of the books we read and the people we meet. And that really hit me. And I thought, wow, I look at turning points in my life, and a lot of times it's been a particular person. And the idea that if you and I just wanted to make money and we met all the time with X number of guys, probably at the end of that time, we're probably better at making money. But if we wanted to expand our faith, we wanted to serve our neighbor and become a better friend, to meet with people that are generous, to people that are concerned about their fellow man, the benefit to that on a covenantal basis was, to me, I am very selfish, but I'm less selfish than I was having been in a covenantal group like that.
So let's talk about the formation of C7. When did Citizen 7 come about, Don? Who had the idea between you and Greg? What was the impetus for it?
I think we both had the same itch. And I'm the guy that all of a sudden I'll mention something, Greg will just ramp up his enthusiasm, and then he'll just drag me along. There's times I'm thinking, some of these meetings, is anybody going to show up? Hey, I'll do this, but there aren't going to be anybody there. So.
But you need, Greg, I think I see all the faces giggling a little bit, Greg, but you need that energy. You need that person who can push things along. I love it, Don.
And other folk, you'd say, hey, that's a great idea. And hey, when's the tea time for golf? Versus, great. Oh, yes, we had to do that. Hey, we're going to do such and such. And how about March 18th? Oh, my God. I guess so, Greg. So I would say I don't think we really set out to try to be something big or scale it across the country or whatever. We just thought we will be better people. Ken Blanchard came here and did a thing on Lead Like Jesus, the 1 Minute Manager author. And he has a thing called What is Sin? And sin is ego edging God out. And that really resonated with me, that there's a lot of things that I was pursuing that really were about my own ego, and that we needed to be certain that our daily lives, whether it's the kindness or the stranger next to us or our neighbor, that he said we need to be sure that we make Jesus smile. And I thought, wow, if you put on your to-do list, what would make Jesus smile today might be different than strictly goals and objectives and making $1 for the day. Go ahead, Greg.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, no, I just want to echo that. I was a point guard in high school, and Don's my power forward, and he knows where he needs to be to shoot, but I need to get him the ball and I'm going to make it happen kind of thing. And so I'm a connector and a galvanizer. And as we were mentoring, one of Don's friends, Kim Clark, who's now deceased, but he loved Jesus and loved us and those kids, he joined us. And so 2 became 3, and we were friends. And all of a sudden, other guys who were mission minded were in our lives. And we thought, let's bring guys together. Guys are lonely. I've lived through loneliness. Don has my friends. I was with high powered people in grad school at Lilly and whatnot. They were lonely at root, and men were getting the short end of the stick, and men wanted to be together, but men don't do just going out for coffee and talking about what's on TV all the time. Now, some do, but that's not the kind of men that Don and I seem to be around. We are around men that want to build, that want to make and create, to realize that they are called here to this planet, to this city, for a purpose that's bigger than themselves. And so those guys were in our network, and we started to just say, hey, what if we were to meet around the city? We met at Fairbanks. We met at the Urban League. We met here and there. Robert was involved, and a few of you guys early on, just meeting around, doing luncheons at these places, saying, here's some good stuff going on in the city that's mission-minded, and friends came together that way. So it just evolved. We never, like Don said, we aren't an organization even today. We're a network, we're an ecosystem of friends. And we always had the mantra of let's have fun together. We aren't going to be a program. There's Kiwanis, there's Lions, there's Penrod Society, there's all kinds of things. And bless their hearts, keep going. But we were just a network of friends who wanted to love city, but underlying it at the core, why we were going to do that was not out of being a do-gooder or tossing off a few breadcrumbs to help the poor. Our why was Jesus Christ. And we don't beat people over the head with that. We are very welcome and inclusive. It's beautiful when my Muslim friends come to our Citizen 7 events. It's beautiful when my atheistic friends, when my friends who've been turned off to Christianity, have been beaten over the head as a young kid, come to these events. We want to be very inclusive, but we want to keep it with guys at the core, because guys need brotherly friendships. And that's what we've experienced. And that sort of evolved. And now I forget, Laura, how many guys are on our mailing list, but she surprised me the other day with this big number. Does that mean I know everybody on the mailing list? Is Don? By no means, but at least people are inviting others, and we're hoping to see what God does as we seek to love and care for this city. And you're going to be hearing about some things we'll be sponsoring down the road that are allowing us to see and to participate in what's happening here in the city.
Yeah, and don't let me forget, Greg, to talk about Heartbeat and the podcast and some of these things and why we're doing these things. But I really want to hear your thoughts, both you and Don. When you invited me to it, I wasn't really sure what it was. I was like, okay, is this a networking event? Do I show up and have business cards and hand those out? Am I going to go and get clients? Like, I didn't really know what it was. And then, I guess, how would you explain a Citizen 7 event and the whole organization, or not organization, because it's just like a loose network, right? It's not a networking event per se.
Don, do you want to take crack? Want me to?
No, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, we are about giving, not taking. We want to instill an ethos of making, not taking. I go to other networking events where it's all about passing out your business card and making sure I can get something from you. We pass out business cards. That's beautiful. But what I hear around the table is, hey, I can help you. I can connect you with someone who can help you get going. It's that kind of culture that we're trying to create, one of generosity. At this point, I want to mention Kyle Defer sitting there, nice and our sage advisor. Don served on the National Christian Foundation Central Indiana board. He was a founding board member, and Kyle is their leader. And you need to meet Kyle. I want to thank NCF because they provided a fiscal backbone that allows us to actually do things with money for the good. And so they've been a great helper. But the reason I bring Kyle up now is that word generosity I used. Kyle and NCF are all about generosity, not out of a legal obligation, but out of wanting to give all that God has given us into the world, to give love, not take love, to give money, not take money, etc. So that's the culture, and that's what brings us together. I hope people feel it. I hope, Chris, when you came for the first time, that's what you sensed. It's hard to explain an ecosystem because I can't turn them to a set of bylaws. I can turn them to a website that we're going to expand, but I can't turn them to a set of bylaws that allows someone to experience it. We do have values. We're going to be publishing something because you've been helping us create a white paper that explains a bit more, but it's really one of experiencing fun and friendship and fellowship versus explaining something didactically using a white sheet of paper.
Yeah, Don, what I've experienced is at these events is not men talking about their jobs. Maybe some of that comes up, but I do, as you're walking around Goodwill, hear little conversations between guys saying, yeah, let's get lunch, asking about families, asking about other things. Like, it's people are there to build friendships, and it's much different, I think, than other groups that I've been to.
I think that for me, I have golf friends and sometimes we have work friends. Sometimes some of those are fairly, I don't know whether temporary is the right word, but sometimes when all of a sudden you can't play golf, then all of a sudden you never see those people. And the hope, having had 2 new hips, I can relate to that. Okay, did you forget me? Yeah, they did. The game went on and I didn't get a call for anything. David Brooks wrote a recent book, How to Know a Person, to see deeply and be deeply seen. And I think that is one of our motivators, is to help all of us. And from a selfish standpoint, I'm interested in one of my lifetime goals is to love deeply and to be deeply loved. So having just totally shallow friendships or just hearing speakers, et cetera, is not our motivation. So that's why we use icebreakers and do some things that hopefully people are sharing a little, have some authenticity, have some vulnerability, maybe share some of their fears, some of their aspirations. So I think that's one of our goals. And I think also Citizen 7 is very intentional, really wants to have a broad tent, and that's a diversity of ages and diversity of ethnic backgrounds. And that really helps it be a more rich environment.
All right, so we have just a few more minutes. Obviously, we have not even touched the surface of their backgrounds, of the background of C7, where they want to take this. Let's take some questions. You can raise your hand in the app, or if you don't know how to do that, just start talking. And we'll see how that goes. So if you have a question, feel free to raise the hand in the chat. Pause just here for another second or two to see if we've got questions. Kyle Defer, do you have one?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, as you think about Citizen 7 in the next couple of years, how do you see it evolving, or how would you like to see it evolve over the next couple of years?
I'd love to see it growing. I think it's at about 600 on the mailing list, but those guys aren't all fully engaged. So one is deeper engagement with everybody that we do have a connection with, and do that through a number of ways. Secondly is a more predetermined cadence of what a year might look like. We're going to be sponsoring urban bus tours. We're going to be sponsoring different people serving in different arenas per their interest. Third, we'd love to see smaller groups, especially of next generation, Kyle, form out of friendship. Don and I have been together for over 20 years. What if other young men would come together for life, and they're in their 20s and 30s now, and through Citizen 7, just organically start to develop friendships? So lots and lots of more committed relationships amongst diverse guys would be another expansion. Fourth would be to be a sense of healing of our city, resilience in our city as our city grows, as it goes through trials, that those who are in power in the city know that they can turn to a group of guys who provide a balm in Gilead, who are a salve when things get upset, who are about making and building our city. Where Bob Bosley on the city council starts to get word, hey, this group isn't out for political gain. This group is not out to get something. They're here to serve. Let's make them a first call when something hits the fan. How can we engage them? Things like that, where our inward depth and our outward presence is felt even more dramatically than it is now.
This is a good place to also talk about Heartbeat Chat and what this podcast is doing and expanding some of those out. But if I may, you guys clean up, but Heartbeat.chat was, I've experienced it, right? The rhythm of seeing the same guys every time is maybe you know their face, but you don't know their name. So Heartbeat.chat allows like a LinkedIn meets a Slack meets Kajabi meets podcasting platform. And so that's one way to glue people together and maybe speed up some of those relationships, but not meant to replace anything. And then these conversations are also meant to institutionalize their philosophy between Don and Greg and inspire others to do the same thing. Did I get it right, Greg?
That sounds beautiful. I love it. And I love Heartbeat. Thanks for Colin, who's on the line here, suggesting it, and for Chris for taking up that mantle. Basically, too, this, again, fun. I want this city to be a city bursting with life. And the more we can bring fun between us and fellowship, and may the overflow of that spread into our city, that's really meaningful to me, to see us in a time of stress and pressure, maybe economic downturn. They're always predicting that. But how can we maintain the sense of joy across all these religious and racial and ethnic and age and socioeconomic divisions? How can we retain that sense of joy as a people here in the city? Don, what did you add to all that? Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, you cannot forget to thank Laura, too, and maybe explain Laura Davis and her role and how instrumental she is to everything.
Yeah, I'll let Don do all that.
Laura actually just moved here from Connecticut, so she is a new resident, has never lived in Indiana, lived in Texas. She's been my executive assistant for a number of years, but she is the heartbeat behind the heartbeat. I'm technologically challenged, and she bailed me out 3 minutes before this thing came on. And so she maintains all the lists and helps. She just keeps the trains running on time. So we're thankful for Laura.
Yes.
Take one question if anybody wants to go. All right, let's give final thoughts. Don, we'll start with you, and then Greg, just final thoughts on where this thing is going and what your prayer for people that get involved are.
Reed Carpenter was the guy that ran the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation, and amazing guy. And guy, Bob Buford, that wrote the book Halftime. He said he wanted Pittsburgh to be known as much for God as it was for steel. And I guess the aspiration might be that Indianapolis might be known for God/Jesus as much as it is for racing. So I think we're not saving the world. But if we have authentic relationships with people that want to acknowledge their creator and want to understand what that looks like to be in that relationship and to help their fellow man, if we do that in a small way and get to know some of the finest people in central Indiana along the way, I think it would be a success.
When Toph Day came on moment's notice, Don landed him. He replaced David Rosenberg last year to give a talk at Meridian Hills. He came by afterwards, and we've developed a friendship. He said, I never felt so much love. For those of you who were there, he threw around a few F-bombs. He was liberated to do that. You couldn't do that in a church. He teared up. This is what Citizen 7 is all about. It's taking a guy whose vision is to raise $1 billion fund using government monies to allocate to stand up Indiana businesses by the year 2032. And here he is melting down at Citizen 7 just because no one said anything to him. He felt something there and he was free. That's what we're about. We are a space for men to be loved, to be seen, and to be known, and to experience that deep friendship. And then to channel and harness that to be full of a sense of being called to the city, to help repair and build and do good, to love their spouses, to love their neighborhoods, to serve those in their business, their colleagues, their suppliers, whoever, but do it in a renewed, rejuvenated sense. And at the end of the day, when they ask us, why do you have this hope for this world, for this city? Things are going downhill. As Peter says, we need to have an answer for the hope that lies within us. And that hope is Jesus Christ. That doesn't come at the front. We aren't ashamed of our faith. We will lead with that, but the bottom line is at the back end. After all the exploration, all the hurt, all the pain, all the striving for success, to move them to significance together and say, here's the hope that lies within us. That's my dream for who we are as a people. And I look forward to having a lot of fun with you guys.
All right, Don, Greg, thank you both so much for doing this. This will be available this afternoon again in Heartbeat. Thank you so much for everybody that joined us here and asked questions. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate it. And thank you, Laura, for making this happen and organizing all of it. And please, if you would, sign up for the email newsletters, sign up for heartbeat.chat. You can find all of that by contacting Laura. You've seen her email. You can reply to any of the emails that you've gotten, and we'll put a link in the show notes if you're listening and you're like, I don't know who Laura is and I don't know how to find any of that. So we'll make it easy for you so you can join. Please get involved. And when is the next event? Do you have that organized, Greg? When is that going to happen?
We're working on it. There's a series of things, but we want to sequence them well. Stay tuned.
I love a cliffhanger. That is the best way to end a podcast. So stay tuned to the email list, and we'll see you again next month.